master, seeing this, didn't care about the future of our protagonist and left the decision entirely up to her. The girl, valuing her worth, knew she had to prove her competence by either recruiting or eliminating the protagonist. After some reflection, she decided she would kill him. Hey everyone, did you enjoy the story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys. Meanwhile, at Liu Yi's house, he sat at the table in his room and devised an action plan for the game. He needed to level up his character and equipment to level 60, while also preparing a fortified camp in the real world before the apocalypse. In his previous life, he remembered that the highest level ever reached by a player was 60. If he could reach that level before the real world's domination, he would effectively become the strongest player. With that power, he could ensure his own safety and his sister's. With the collapse of public order and resource scarcity, only the most powerful guilds would be able to restore balance. In that scenario, food became the most valuable currency. Therefore, it was essential to stock supplies and establish a secure camp for him and his sister. With the funds available, he decided to rent a neighboring building, while the remaining money would be invested in buying rice and canned food. Now, he just had to wait for the supplies to arrive. In the game, his level was only 36, still far from his goal. To reach the maximum, he just needed to avoid dying and keep accumulating resources in the real world. That way, he and his sister could live in peace after the domination. When he entered the game with his sister and her friend, he led them to the weapon pavilion. He explained that in the world of Human World, strength was the most important skill, and its foundation lay in weapon practice. To maximize growth, it was essential to master different types of weaponry, and thus awaken their true power. His sister analyzed the spear while he reminded Nyanchu that skill without ki was useless. Therefore, they should practice with all weapons until they reach their full potential. Currently, Nyanchu was at level 32. Both agreed with the plan. After that, Liu Yi walked toward the exit and while observing them, reflected on how his actions had changed the course of history. In his past life, Nyanchu never came to his house. He didn't believe his interference had anything to do with her bringing the device to Liu Yan. In the past, thanks to Nyanchu, he and his sister survived for 3 whole years. Now he felt it was his turn to repay the favor. With this determination, he ran out of the pavilion, and as he jumped with joy, he felt he was getting closer and closer to his goal, reaching level 60. Half a day later, Liu Yi emerged from a level 35 dungeon, now at level 37. One of his team members, smiling, commented on his impressive strength, saying that he could clear a dungeon designed for 10 players all by himself. Another teammate agreed, mentioning that without him, the group would have had a much harder time. Excited, they decided to face the dungeon again, but Liu Yi refused as he still had other priorities. The players, disappointed, insisted that he add them as friends and promised to call them next time. He smiled, scratched the back of his head, and agreed. However, upon returning to the team's search room, he clenched his fists nervously, reflecting on a major problem. Clearing a level 35 dungeon designed for 10 players took at least half a day, maybe even a whole day. The experience gained there amounted to half a level. If he continued at this pace, in 20 days before the real world's domination, he would only reach level 50. Reaching 60 would be impossible. Sitting alone in the empty hall, he pondered over his first experience clearing that dungeon. That was when he received the title of Dungeon Protector and realized there was only one solution. By sacrificing 9 teammates, he could maximize his experience. In his previous life, such dungeons were called slaughterhouses, and players who resorted to this method were known as street rats. If he followed this path, he would become one of them. However, if that was the only alternative, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a notification. A system window appeared before him, announcing a new message. Upon opening it, he saw an invitation to a dungeon. It was a level 40 expedition for 10 people. Reading the familiar name, he was surprised. Then the surprise turned into joy. Standing up from the bench, he exclaimed that this was the girl who, in his past life, became the strongest fighter. Liu Yi wondered why she would suddenly invite him to a dungeon. If he accepted, he would have a unique opportunity to evolve quickly. A confident smile appeared on his face. Besides, she was a member of the New Order. In the past, he had never met her under such circumstances, so he was sure she was plotting something against him. His legs trembled for a moment, but his eyes remained firm. Only the dungeon would allow him to grow. With that in mind, he made his decision. He accepted the invitation. The team list was displayed before him. All players had levels ranging from 37 to 45. Seeing the familiar names on the list, Liu Yi smiled upon noticing Lin Fei. He remembered that in his previous life he had received the reward for a desperate situation after completing the task entirely. Before that, he had destroyed all of his comrades. He recalled how his former teammates had slandered him in the general chat. The girl with the nickname Cookie had a similar story, but in her case she started harassing other players. In the end, she ended up killing everyone in self-defense. The other team members had similar pasts. The team for this dungeon had been carefully selected by Wei Xi herself. Liu Yi touched his chin thoughtful and pondered how Wei Xi could have known that those players were problematic. After joining the group, a chat became available, and he informed everyone that since they were all gathered, they should set off. Wei Xi sent a location on the map where they should meet. Lin Fei, upon seeing the new member, questioned Wei Xi's choice, doubting whether he was really the player she had mentioned and why he was still at level 37. Wei Xi replied that in the team, levels didn't matter because strength was the most important thing. Liu Yi opened the map and noticed that most of the members were in Muksu City, while the rest were either in the uncontrolled area or on their way there. His expression grew serious as he analyzed the situation. The uncontrolled zone was a dangerous place. The controlled territories of Muksu City were divided into 5 zones. Muksu City served as a resource replenishment point for all players. All dungeons within the city were under control and had been modified long ago. There were beginner-level dungeons and larger challenges. Especially Dangerous Zone was designated for players seeking extreme challenges. The controlled danger zone was fully modified and all creatures were sealed within the city. He had already gone into one of these dungeons with Chicken Crown. The Chaos Zone was a deadly territory. Muksu's influence over the dungeons there was minimal. Creatures above level 30 roamed freely outside the dungeons. The out-of-control zone was even worse. Players would almost immediately die upon entering. Their creatures above level 70 wandered, finally in the zone of destruction. Muksu City had no control over this area. The creatures from the dungeons there could not be sealed. Monsters at the maximum level were capable of annihilating everything. After some time, Liu Yi was already in the uncontrolled area, approaching the meeting point. He was running quickly through the forest when suddenly he heard a scream. He turned, trying to identify who might have been screaming. Moments later, monsters made of branches and leaves emerged into a clearing in the forest. Seeing them, he crouched behind a nearby rock and watched as the creatures rushed toward the stream, releasing vines along the way. He realized that the monsters were not very strong individually, but their numbers were a problem. A single sound could attract them in successive waves. That scream could only have come from a careless player. After a few moments, silence returned. Liu Yi peeked out and confirmed that the monsters had moved away. He hesitated, wondering if the player who screamed was still alive. Jumping out of his hiding spot, he was convinced that he should keep moving. He continued toward the meeting point, but out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something approaching. A spear tip was flying straight at him. He reacted just in time, grabbing the weapon in midair and leaning back to dodge the strike. The attacker advanced and Liu Yi tried to figure out who it was. The opponent gripped the spear firmly and attacked again, but Liu Yi managed to dodge. Now he was looking directly into the opponent's face, whose eyes burned with excitement. Liu Yi drew his katana and counterattacked. The enemy held their weapon with both hands, blocking the blade with the tip of the spear. Then they smiled. The impact caused a loud bang, sending dust and leaves flying around them. After a few seconds of silence, they remained face to face, analyzing each other. Lin Fei and the player who had attacked him showed satisfaction with the fight. It seemed he had understood why Liu Yi had been chosen by the captain. Liu Yi frowned, and after a moment of hesitation, Lin Fei, still smiling, acknowledged that his strength was not comparable to Liu Yi's, but he believed he had earned some respect from him. Before leaving, he emphasized that they needed to get to the meeting point quickly, or else they could be surrounded by monsters. With that, he left without further delay. Only then did Liu Yi lower his katana and watch as Lin Fei walked away. He recognized that this player possessed true power, and there was a great chance that YXI also had this strength. The team was incredibly strong. It was still unclear whether anyone there would be able to obtain the reward for the desperate situation, but the chance of dying in that dungeon remained very high. However, after some time he arrived at the meeting point, where the others were already waiting for him. As he approached the portal, he hesitated upon noticing a girl sitting on a nearby rock smiling at him. She stood up, clapped her hands to get everyone's attention, and announced that before entering the dungeon, she wanted to say a few words. The protagonist observed the team members around him, recognizing that he was now part of that group, even if he wasn't entirely sure about it yet. The captain took the floor and explained that the dungeons in the uncontrolled zone were extremely unpredictable. For this reason, the first action upon entering should be to understand its rules, no matter how unusual they might seem. He reinforced that everyone needed to remain calm and discuss the plan rationally, as this would be the key to completing the mission. The players agreed with his words, and the girl approved of the group's attitude before leading them to the portal, stating that they would move forward. As the others advanced, the protagonist hesitated for a moment, recalling his previous uncertainties. He reflected on his feelings and realized that ever since he met YXD, considered the strongest player, he had begun to doubt his own abilities. He didn't know if his uneasiness was insecurity, nervousness, or simply the fear of never measuring up to them. He also feared failing and seeing his efforts go to waste. However, instead of letting these doubts consume him, he lifted his gaze to the moon shining above the forest, took a deep breath, and moved forward, determined to prove his worth. As soon as they crossed the portal, images began to appear before their eyes, narrating the dungeon's story. A doll lamented that her companion no longer wanted to play with her. Sitting against the wall, unconscious, was the woman she used to have fun with. Without showing emotion, the doll stated that if her friend no longer wanted to play, she would find another toy. The hallways then filled with corpses. The one responsible for that scene, a small bloodstained mechanical doll, expressed boredom and said that her old companion had been the most fun fun. Now, with no one left, she had to go home. However, she lowered her head and murmured to herself that it was no longer possible. The cutscene ended, and the players found themselves at the top of a circular tower. In the center, atop a pedestal, was the same bloodstained doll. At the base of the structure, an inscription read, "Hope and despair coexist." The team was still trying to understand what they had just witnessed when one of the players questioned what kind of dungeon they had entered. Another team member agreed that this was unlike anything they had seen before. They stepped away from the portal, and one of the players commented that the unpredictability of dungeons, their maps, and challenges made the meta world both terrifying and fascinating. Another added that the most distressing part was knowing that some dungeons were impossible to cross without losing lives in the process. Observing the pedestal, they concluded that the only entity present was the doll, which indicated that she might be the key to understanding this place. However, before they could react, the figure vanished, and immediately, the system notified all players. The dungeon entrance had been sealed. To escape, they needed to complete the mission titled Puppet Tricks. The dungeon required the players to destroy the doll. A marionette would appear in the backpack of one team member, and the task of the others would be to eliminate the marionette's owner. The dungeon would only be completed if the player with the marionette survived for 6 hours. If time ran out, the mission would fail. According to the rules, the marionette's owner could transfer it to another player if they managed to kill one of their allies. Upon reading the mission description, the protagonist was surprised. He thought that this dungeon seemed to have been designed specifically for those who sought rewards in desperate situations. The mission stated that if the player passed the marionette to the last survivor, they would have a 100% chance of obtaining the highest reward. The system announced that the marionette had appeared and that the countdown had begun. Lou immediately decided to check his backpack to make sure he wasn't the one holding the toy. However, as he opened the system window, he paused and reflected. It wasn't the right time to do this. He knew that once the other players calmed down, he would need to check if he had the marionette. If he did, he would have to decide whether to hand it over, but doing so would make him a target for everyone else. Facing two powerful fighters was not an ideal situation, and his chances of survival would drop drastically. The other players began looking at each other suspiciously, and the atmosphere grew tense. Liu Yi noticed that everyone seemed to be watching the person beside them. Perhaps they were hiding, or maybe they were in the same situation as him. It was then that Weixai clapped her hands, drawing the group's attention. Liu Yi turned his gaze toward her as Weixai smiled and spoke. She suggested that since everyone knew the mission's objective, the player with the marionette should surrender, allowing their death to be certain. She proposed that each of them would contribute a portion of the reward, distributing it fairly. Weixai then asked if all the players who did not have the marionette in their backpack agreed with the idea. Most players nodded in agreement with her proposal. Seizing the distraction, the protagonist saw an opportunity to quickly check his backpack while everyone was focused on her. He opened the system window and examined his inventory. However, his eyes widened in shock. He had just discovered that the marionette was in his backpack. He thought to himself that he had just joined the team, and they had already placed that marionette in his possession as a gift. He frowned as he looked at his inventory once more and then observed the other players. His main objective now was to eliminate one of the team members so that the puppet would transfer to someone else. He needed to get rid of the imminent threat, but he still didn't know who he should choose as his target. Even if he handed over the puppet, he would struggle to fight against two powerful players who would certainly show no mercy. Without waiting for a response, one of the players asked if anyone wanted to confess. Liu Yi remained silent, lowering his gaze, but was soon surprised by the team captain, who approached and stared directly at him. With a confident smile, he stated that it was time for him to admit that he had the puppet. Liu Yi was shocked by the sudden accusation, but he quickly regained his composure, assuming a serious expression. As he processed the captain's words, one of the female players mentioned his name and said she liked standing out. She then demanded that he talk about himself. Liu Yi, however, remained rigid and silent. He looked at the other team members again, noticing that they were all smiling in a peculiar way. The memory of the exchanged glances between them sparked growing suspicion within him. Gradually, he realized that even without directly analyzing each other's reactions, they had found a way to confirm that he had the puppet. They were all working together. Upon understanding the situation, Liu Yi let out a laugh. Everything seemed obvious now. A sudden invitation to such a strong team was nothing more than a disguised test. Still not fully understanding the reason for the woman's hostility toward him, he concluded that this dungeon had been specifically designed to eliminate him. The large number of players gathered there was proof of that. He cast an evaluating look at the female player, analyzing the situation, concluded that by inviting him to complete the dungeon, they had signed his death sentence. After all, the only reward in that desperate situation belonged to him. His smile widened as he began to understand the game they were trying to impose on him. The woman in turn commented that he was rude, but that it didn't bother her. Liu Yi had already demonstrated his strength, but he was still far from being a match for the rest of the team. They wasted no time with unnecessary discussions. The sooner they finished the battle, the quicker they could move on to a new level up. Faced with this, he simply agreed. That was when Lin Fei shouted, offering him a chance to defend himself. For him, this would make the fight more interesting. After all, they wanted to destroy his hopes little by little. YXC, on the other hand, covered her face with her hands and lamented how cruel they were being. However, she soon lowered her hands, revealing a sly smile. With a sharp look, she stated that Liu Yi shouldn't force them to act that way. Without hesitation, Liu Yi quickly switched his equipment for a pendulum and aimed the weapon at her. However, he hesitated before firing. Wei Xi observed his hesitation and concluded that he didn't want to act rashly. She also realized that he wasn't even aware of when he was being spared. The other team members, upon seeing the weapon he was holding, reacted with scorn, exchanging insults among themselves. In their view, they should have been more cautious. After all, a fool who fired without thinking wouldn't stand a chance against opponents like them. Lin Fei smiled, pondering that if they had been warned about Liu Yi, it was because he must have some kind of special ability. Perhaps his shots had the ability to trap his enemies. The other players laughed, commenting that he knew how to play within the metaverse. Magical traps were well-known tricks in that world. One of the allies suggested they take the situation seriously because in the Met, it was possible to create traps. This specific type of technique was what they called a cage. Wei Xi laughed again, clearly enjoying the situation. Liu Yi then smiled and activated his capture ability. Wei Xi's smile immediately disappeared and she jumped back, stopping a few meters away. She looked at herself, and upon realizing she was still unharmed, she tried to hide her nervousness. For an instant, she shuddered and called out to Lin Fei, warning him that they shouldn't play around with Liu Yi. She realized it would be safer to attack him together to end that confrontation as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Liu Yi continued smiling, satisfied that he had trapped Lin Fei inside the cage. The imprisoned player struggled to break free, but the chains remained firm. The other team members reacted with surprise, exclaiming in shock at what had happened. Even Wei Xi stared at her companion, incredulous at the scene before her eyes. It was at that moment that Liu Yi used his special pistol ability called Lock Up. The technique allowed him to choose between tripling the damage or stunning the target. He opted to increase the damage, and immediately, the system informed him that 100 knowledge points had been consumed. His next attack would deal 5,000 damage. With his eyes shining with determination, he raised his gun, aimed directly at Lin Fei, and without hesitation, pulled the trigger. The bullet cut through the air, heading straight for the immobilized player. The bullet pierced through Lin Fei's body, opening a massive hole in his stomach. He lost all his health points and collapsed to the ground. The system notified that Liu Yi had eliminated Lin Fei and successfully transferred the puppet to another player. With the death of a team member, the title of Dungeon Defender was activated, increasing all his stats by 10%. Additionally, he received a pearl as a reward for the kill. Meanwhile, the other team members stared at their fallen companion, shocked by what had just happened. Liu Yi, on the other hand, was reflecting on his situation and his greatest fear, the two possible scenarios that could lead to his death. The first possibility was facing Wei Xi and Lin Fei together in a direct attack. The second, even more dangerous, was the presence of a fourth member on the team, someone with an unknown power. Assessing the available information, he realized that within that team, only Wei Xi and Lin Fei were strong enough to face him. That meant the real danger lay in the first option. His opponents had been overly confident because they underestimated his strength. Thanks to that mistake, he had managed to eliminate Lin Fei, breaking the balance of the strongest duo. Now that he had significantly reduced the threat, he only needed to take down the rest of the team. A smile formed on his face as he realized that victory was within his reach. Although the ideal strategy had been to eliminate Wei Xi first, she had managed to dodge the shot at the last moment. This was due to her heightened perception, a trait that gave her an advantage in fast-paced combat. Liu Yi then issued a direct warning to the team, informing them that the puppet had passed to one of them. If they wanted to protect their ally, they needed to act immediately. Otherwise, he would destroy the puppet, eliminating any chance of revenge. Aware that the team was weakened, he knew he had to be cautious to secure his victory and claim the dungeon's reward. His next step would be to identify the player who had the puppet in their inventory and hold onto it until the end. The team captain, upon hearing this, cursed loudly before freezing in place. The realization of the immediate danger made her spin around toward the group and order everyone to stay still. She knew that Liu Yi was trying to find out who had the puppet. The other team members, visibly nervous, formed a circle around one of them, attempting to hide them. The player at the center, frightened, instinctively took a step back. Liu Yi noticed her reaction and smiled, realizing he had found his target. The terrified look in her eyes confirmed his suspicion. He understood that at that moment, she was completely cornered. Without wasting time, he propelled himself forward and activated his ability, increasing his stats by 200%. He dashed directly toward his target, determined to eliminate anyone who tried to stop him. With his katana in hand, he cut through the players in his path. Their resistance was insignificant. The system notified that he had defeated 6 opponents, increasing his stats by 70%. Some of his attributes surpassed the 1,000 point mark. As a reward for the kills, you received new pearls, equipment, and items. Faced with the carnage, Wei Xi charged at him furiously, wielding her dagger and trying to strike. Liu Yi, however, reacted quickly, blocking the attack with a precise movement of his weapon. Meanwhile, one of the players, nicknamed Cookie, trembled with fear and collapsed to the ground, unable to react. The team captain, noticing his condition, exclaimed that Cookie was still alive but had the puppet. That meant Liu Yi was aiming for the dungeon's reward. Surprised by his audacity, the captain mocked him, but Liu Yi only responded with a smile. Her boots gleamed as she activated her arcane jump ability, allowing her to move quickly to the side. She warned her opponent that he had made a mistake by choosing her as his target. With almost imperceptible speed, she began to circle around him. Liu Yi remained alert, realizing that in an instant, she had simply vanished from his line of sight. Before he could react, Wei Xi appeared behind him, ready to strike. However, anticipating her movement, he turned and swung his katana in her direction. Wei Xi, being more agile, dodged again and reappeared behind him, landing a punch. Without giving him space to recover, she continued attacking repeatedly, drastically reducing Liu Yi's health. He then activated his recovery ability, instantly restoring his health bar. Next, he raised his blade over his opponent. Wei Xi, surprised, announced that the damage she had inflicted was 9,000 points, equivalent to 75% of his total health. She recognized that she was facing an absurdly resilient opponent. The clash of blades echoed loudly. Confident, Wei Xi stated that at this rate, he would run out of healing potions before the battle ended. That would guarantee her victory. Liu Yi, however, simply smiled. Without hesitation, Wei Xi switched weapons and executed a sudden attack. The strike was devastating, reducing 9,800 points of his life. But just like before, Liu Yi restored his health in an instant. Stunned, Wei Xi tried to make sense of what was happening. She knew that the level 30 instant recovery potion only restored 1,000 health points, and that each player could only carry 10 vials inside the dungeon. However, Liu Yi had already regenerated more than 19,000 points in total. It didn't make sense. As she tried to comprehend the situation, she failed to notice Liu Yi's sudden movement. He advanced with a powerful punch, striking her forcefully. Then, with a smile on his face, he apologized. Liu Yi confidently declared that the only winner there was him. Wei Xi gritted her teeth, dodging at the exact moment he attacked again. He watched her with a displeased look as she quickly retreated, stopping beside Cookie. That was when she made an observation. Given Liu Yi's enormous health pool, she was convinced that he possessed support abilities. Liu Yi smiled at her deduction and responded that Wei Xi, on the other hand, had invested all her distribution points into dexterity. Besides her strength in close combat, her speed had reached an abnormal level, and her attacks almost always resulted in critical hits. For a brief moment, her expression grew serious. Then, forcing a smile, she admitted that because of this, her knowledge stat was extremely low, which now left her completely exhausted. She reflected that she was probably out of options. Maybe the best thing to do was simply kill Cookie and end the confrontation once and for all. Liu Yi immediately became cautious. He thought that somehow he had overestimated his own strength to the point of forcing her to consider such an extreme option. Wei Xi was far too fast. If she wanted to, she could have killed Cookie hundreds of times before he could even react. But if she knew she couldn't defeat Liu Yi directly, why was she still hesitating? Her behavior seemed contradictory. Liu Yi then asked what exactly she was waiting for. If Cookie was still alive, that meant it wasn't time to celebrate just yet. The system notified that the enhancement of all stats had been completed. Additionally, the pendulum and captivity ability had fully recharged. His eyes widened, and without wasting time, he aimed his weapon at Wei Xi, ready to activate his ability. However, suddenly, his body froze in place. Confusion took over his mind. What was happening? Before he could understand, Cookie delivered a fatal blow to the team captain. Wei Xi looked at Liu Yi with a confident smile. The truth was revealed in the following seconds. Moments earlier, Wei Xi had instructed Cookie to kill her and then take his own life, ensuring that Liu Yi wouldn't be able to claim victory. She had promised her teammate double the reward if he followed the plan, and that was exactly what he did. After striking her, Cookie killed himself. Their bodies began to fade away. Liu Yi remained still, stunned by what had just happened. It was unbelievable. Wei Xi laughed loudly before disappearing completely, calling Liu Yi a loser and declaring that he had lost. When their bodies vanished entirely, Liu Yi was left alone in the dungeon. He took a step back, still confused, until his legs gave out and he collapsed to the ground. His mind swirled with questions. How did this happen? Why? Upon checking his inventory, he realized that the puppet had returned to him. That realization hit him hard. The entire fight had been completely nullified. Why would Wei Xi do something like that? Was it all just to deny him a possible victory? To him, it was ridiculous. He grabbed his own head in frustration, trying to understand what he should do. Both of them were dead, and now the puppet was with him. If Wei Xi hadn't killed herself and he had managed to defeat her, the puppet would have completed its journey in his inventory. Now, with no players remaining, all that was left was to wait for his own death. The chance to change everything had been lost so easily. He should have won. A loud, desperate scream echoed through the dungeon. After a while, his breathing stabilized. He lay on the ground, trying to catch his breath. Staring at the ceiling, he murmured to himself that there had to be another way. If all his allies were dead, then Yuan World wouldn't just let him lose like that. That meant there had to be another method to get around this situation. He got up and looked around, trying to think of all the possibilities. Then he decided to explore the room, determined to find an escape. Upon reaching the edge of the platform, Liu Yi extended extended his hand and felt something invisible in front of him. He quickly realized it was a transparent wall. After analyzing his surroundings, he concluded that the special dungeon's territory was limited to the size of that cylindrical platform. After another careful inspection of the area, he approached the central pedestal. With the doll in hand, he climbed onto the pedestal and cautiously posed, evaluating every detail around him. Soon, his eyes landed on a plaque engraved with an intriguing message: "Hope and despair exist together." Upon closer examination, he noticed a scratch marking just below the main inscription. As he moved closer, he realized that something was written in small letters. Running his fingers over the surface of the stone, he managed to decipher the words carved there: "I can't open the door." As he touched the inscription, he felt the slab beneath his hand give way slightly. A distinct sound of a mechanism being activated echoed through the air. At that moment, the system notified him that he had found the entrance to the Cutscene Research Institute. A new piece of information appeared before him. To open the membrane, 1,000 cognition points were required. Liu Yi furrowed his brows upon seeing the required amount. It was a significant sum, especially considering that his energy was already compromised due to the effects. Even though he had a strength stat exceeding 1,500, his last battle had left him with just over 1,000 cognition points. He wasn't sure how to obtain more within that environment. By spending 700 points to increase all his abilities by 350, he would reach the 1,000 cognition points needed to open the membrane. That way, he would still have a positive balance of over 300 points. Considering that he was about to enter unknown territory, he decided it was best to be fully prepared for combat. Confirming his choice, the system registered the action. All of his abilities were increased by 350 points. The 700 cognition points were consumed. The remaining 1,000 points were used to open the membrane. At that very moment, the pedestal before him transformed into a door. A strong gust of wind blew against his face. Suddenly, a male voice called his name. The tone of the voice carried urgency, urging him to make a decision quickly. The voice mentioned the need to choose between two options: display what followed him or dissolve and map everything. Liu Yi blinked, confused, unable to fully grasp the situation. The man insisted, warning that the choice had to be made immediately so that his computational power could be activated. Feeling lost, Liu Yi tried to find some logic in it. What exactly did these options mean? And what would be the consequences of making the wrong choice? He analyzed the context. If this was a fixed system test, then they were probably on the brink of a great disaster. The key point seemed to be the concept of computational power. He pondered whether displaying this power meant ensuring his own survival or if it was merely a tool that could be used to escape the impending catastrophe. Reflecting on his past life, he realized he had never come this far to face a dilemma like this. If the goal was to ensure his own survival and that of his sister, the most logical option was to display what followed him. However, if the only way to avoid disaster was through an external resource, then the safest path was to dissolve and map everything. Liu Yi knew that if disaster was inevitable, the only way to face it was to be prepared for the consequences. He also considered that the purpose of mapping computational power might be related to selecting individuals with certain qualities. But how could he be sure he was making the right choice? By the end of his reflection, he concluded that he needed to ensure that the Forgotten Ones had access to perfect computational power. After all, only a few were able to return to the characteristic of imagination. If the first world had never emerged, players would never have evolved to the level they were at now. Convinced that this was the best possible decision, Liu Yi chose to dissolve and map everything. The moment he confirmed his choice, sparks appeared before his eyes. He held his breath, waiting for the result. However, as soon as the light faded, he realized he was in the exact same place. His body remained still for a few seconds until he finally furrowed his brows and looked around. Nothing had changed. The conclusion was inevitable. He had chosen the wrong option. Liu Yi sat down and crossed his arms over his chest, contemplating whether the correct answer was to focus on revealing who was following him. He still had 350 cognition points remaining. Because it was a parasite in his body, the puppet kept him in constant battle, making cognition recovery extremely slow. Even so, with the 5 hours left, he would be able to accumulate 1,000 points and have the opportunity to take the test twice. That would be enough. All he had to do was wait. He closed his eyes and prepared to endure. After an hour and a half, the system notified him that he had accumulated 700 cognition points. He abruptly opened his eyes, accelerated his recovery, and spent 1,000 points to activate the membrane. Once again, he was presented with the same two options: focus on displaying who was following him or dissolve and map everything. Liu Yi was about to click on the first option but hesitated at the last moment. If the test was just about choosing between these options, then why couldn't he simply enter the Research Institute by making the correct choice? If the door blocked the puppet's passage, then he would never be able to enter that institute, which he considered his home. Something was wrong, but what exactly? Was it a matter of the power of knowledge? Or perhaps it was related to some specific characteristic? The available information indicated that the puppet had left the institute due to its stubbornness and now wished to return, but the door prevented it. Maybe it wasn't about making the right choice, but rather having the right attitude. Liu Yi furrowed his brow, reflecting on this possibility. At the end of his analysis, he decided to trust his judgment and once again chose the second option. Once more, he returned to the platform. Nothing had changed. He had only one more attempt left. If he made a mistake, he would have to wait again. Even so, he still believed in himself. He sat down once again and waited. After an hour and a half, only 27 minutes remained before the task ended. When checking his cognition points, he saw that he had accumulated 700. Liu Yi opened his eyes, used the remaining points, and activated the membrane. This time, after choosing the second option, he immediately stepped back and felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. He jumped backward and saw the pedestal begin to descend. A satisfied smile appeared on his face as he exclaimed loudly that he had succeeded. The hardest part of the test was over. Now he was sure that the real challenge wasn't choosing the right option, but insisting on the validity of his choice. The door would only open if the same option was selected 3 consecutive times. In front of him, a staircase leading downward appeared. He observed the entrance to the research institute and concluded that the secret level was meant to be completed by a team. As he descended the steps, he realized that no one had ever completed this task the way he had. To do so, it was necessary to enhance all his skills, rely on pure wisdom, and activate a special counterattack. Without these upgrades, opening the door 3 times would have been impossible. At that moment, no one else would be able to access that hidden level. Liu Yi knew he had been very cautious. Even so, desperation could lead him to make risky decisions. Being bold, however, didn't mean acting recklessly. If he had known before entering that his team was so unstable, he wouldn't have made the mistakes that resulted in so many deaths. He walked down a long, empty, and well-lit corridor. At the end of the path, he found a door. In front of it lay a bloody corpse. As he approached, he noticed it was a woman. Suddenly, a glowing sphere appeared before him. Liu Yi looked at his own chest, surprised, and saw the sphere detach from him. It floated toward the corpse and merged with the body. Shortly after, the system notified him that the evil puppet had been purified. As a reward, Liu Yi received 1% of the membrane's computing power. He sighed in relief. The system then announced that the achievement Desperate Situation had been unlocked, triggering a series of rewards. The system settings began to adjust. Overcome with emotion, Liu Yi felt his legs weaken and leaned against the wall. He stored his weapon in the inventory. His legs were shaking. A smile crossed his face as he realized he was genuinely afraid of death. He covered his face with his hand, feeling embarrassed by his reaction. The system informed him that the configuration was complete. He received 22,464 experience points and 400 coins. His level increased to 44. His HP bar increased to 3,720 and his knowledge power to 846. His combat power was now 898. 2 new skills were unlocked. Status Lock freezes the target's health bar and prevents them from spending knowledge power. For every 10 levels, 1 second is added to the freeze duration. All skills apply to the target for 10 minutes. Consumes 50 cognition points. For every 10 levels, the duration increases by 10 seconds. Liu Yi clenched his fists with excitement. He still couldn't believe what he had accomplished. He thought he had only defeated Wei Sai, but in reality, he had overcome something much greater. He jumped into the air and exclaimed, laughing with joy. The dungeon began to disappear around him. Meanwhile, his sister and his friend had already mastered their weapon skills. The two exchanged glances, satisfied. Wei Sai was waiting for Liu Yi at the player's resurrection point. 6 hours had passed since she last saw him. He had not returned yet. She crossed her arms, worried, and wondered where he could be. Then Blazing Fire sent a message asking what happened. Wei Kai responded with a single sentence. There was a death. Blazing Fire asked if Liu Yi was responsible. Wei Sai clarified that, in fact, she had died. For a moment, Blazing Fire was speechless. After a brief pause, she added that she had obtained valuable information. He wanted to know what he should do. Wei Sai instructed him to arrange a battle for her in the Mirror Realm. A single copy of Myrrh would be enough to restore her level. Blazing Fire agreed. Finally, she mentioned that Liu Yi was the person he was looking for, and that he possessed a special support power. Blazing Fire was sitting in his guild's meeting room, frowning as he looked at Weix's message. The man sitting across from him said he knew how rare support power was and that he would help him in the uncontrolled area. His nickname was Wijie, level 45, and he used fists instead of weapons. Additionally, he also possessed support power. He stated that he had promised to help but would demand something in return, 10,000 coins. The guild president responded with a malicious smile, saying there was no problem. Wijie then left the headquarters of New Order where his friend was already waiting for him. Upon seeing him, his friend excitedly asked how it had gone. Everyone was jumping for joy because they had searched all over the network to find the owner of the support power. Wijie ignored the excitement and, frustrated, kicked a pole, making his friend flinch. After calming down a bit, he said he had arranged everything. His friend exclaimed that this was the first step of the plan and questioned the reason for his anger. Wijie crouched down and shouted loudly, irritated because he had discovered that he was not the only player with support power. Now they needed to rethink their plan to reach the top of New Order. Meanwhile, Liu Yi was sitting in his room looking at a piece of paper where he had written down his thoughts. He was reflecting on the hash power permission, which represented the authority to control the computational output of a specific large machine. Then he wondered if the reward for upgrading the special dungeon was just the beginning of a grand mission or had a deeper meaning. Liu Yi questioned what would happen upon reaching 100% computational power and the relationship between the hash power permission and the test. Rubbing the tip of his nose, he felt exhaustion taking over, but he knew he needed to keep thinking as his future depended on it. He decided to get up and leave his room to relax and take a bath before returning to the game. As soon as he opened the door and stepped into the hallway, he noticed Nyanchu coming out of the bathroom, drying her hair with a towel. Seeing him, she stopped and waved. He returned the wave with a smile and headed toward the bathroom. But before entering, he glanced at her. He thought there was always a pleasant aroma in the air whenever she was home. His face flushed slightly, and he scratched his cheek in embarrassment. Suddenly, he slapped his own face, wondering what he was thinking. He needed to hurry and get into the game to set a goal for the next phase. After some time, he was already in the game and headed to the pavilion, where equipment was created and sold. Standing at the terminal, he reflected on his situation. He was at level 44 and needed to gain 16 more levels to reach level 60. To do this, he would have to complete a special dungeon 32 times, which would take about 20 days. There were only 22 days left until Yuan World became a reality. Time was very short, and he might not be able to reach his goal in time. Additionally, he still had issues with his equipment. There were two ways to obtain Me'eler equipment. The first involved using coins directly. The second consisted of upgrading lower-level equipment. At the moment, he had 11,021 coins. Of those, 6,750 were rewards for traveling to a special dungeon, and the rest came from dismantling equipment he didn't use. The system asked if he wanted to create 40 purple-grade equipment pieces for 650 coins each and upgrade his level 30 gear to level 40 for 400 coins. He realized he was still missing 3 pieces of equipment, a headpiece, a necklace, and an emblem. Combining 9 pieces with the remaining 40, he would spend 5,550 coins. The system reported that it would take 1,100 seconds to upgrade the purple-grade equipment. Liu Yi calculated that he would need 16,129 coins to reach level 60. This meant he would have to play more than 40 times what he had previously. He crossed his arms thoughtfully, considering that if he wanted to reach his goal, he would have to take risks and seek extra rewards. But who should he target? Suddenly, a new message arrived, catching his attention. Before opening it, he hesitated for a moment, feeling a growing nervousness. News only tended to arrive in emergency situations. He told the system to open the message and saw that it was a private communication from the president of the New Order Guild. The message asked if he was available and if they could talk. Protagonist was surprised and remembered how, in his previous life, he had been kicked out by other players, being told that someone like him had no place in New Order. After New Order established itself in the Middle World, they occupied the entire southern region of China and became the strongest guild in the world. They aimed to manage the elite, and as long as a person was elite or had special talents, their life directly depended on New Order. They treated low-level players without special talents like trash and oppressed them in every possible way. As someone who died in a previous life, he could say it was impossible not to hate New Order. He frowned and looked at the message, thinking that he was extremely weak back then. He wondered what was wrong. Blazing Fire wrote that he wanted to form a specialized team for the uncontrolled zone, but so far they didn't have enough people. He had heard that Liu Yi had support power, so he was inviting him to join the team. If Liu Yi had the means, he could discuss it and try to reach an agreement. Liu Yi asked if they were only missing a player with support power. Blazing Fire confirmed his words, and Liu Yi became nervous. Then Blazing Fire wrote that, in other words, this was the strongest team in that world. He asked why they should go to an uncontrolled area. Blazing Fire said that he had his reasons. Liu Yi responded that he would think about it and write back to him later. After that, he wondered if he should agree. Although this team almost prevented him from gaining rewards for his madness, it allowed him to accumulate experience and coins much faster than a regular team. He wondered why he would go there. It was impossible to use the market's transfer gate to directly go to the secret territory. Additionally, there were several monsters above level 70 living there. He decided not to worry about it for now and thought that he should improve his equipment first. The system reported that it would take 650 coins to create purple-grade equipment. Soon, the upgrade was completed and all the stats of his equipment improved. With that, his attack power increased to 9,900, defense to 716, and intelligence to 678, while the rest ranged from 134 to 2,011. His health increased to 6,030, and his cognitive power increased to 2,034. His current combat power was estimated at 102. Since his combat power had surpassed 100, he was upgraded to a Supreme Space Hunter. The attribute level increased from +1 to +2. Because of that, the attack power increased to 11,400, defense to 892, resistance to 159, health to 8,040, and knowledge power to 2,712. The main character looked at the updated equipment and was very pleased, thinking that combat strength brought such cool improvements. After surpassing 100 100 attributes, the mark increased and his strength was amplified by 30%. If he continued improving his combat effectiveness, he would be able to increase all other attributes as well. How much was necessary? 200, 100, or 1000? He suddenly frowned while thinking about something else and diverted his gaze. He thought the Battle Force system could be activated as long as he had the power, but if he had such opportunities, then other players would too. The team formed by the President of New Order. Such command is equivalent to a group of 10. The clones made going to the uncontrolled zone a more viable possibility than it initially seemed. Liu Yi sent a message to Blazing Fire informing him that he would join the team. The response came immediately, stating that his decision was reasonable. It was noted that the team already had a player with support power, ensuring there would be no risk for him. Additionally, Blazing Fire mentioned that Liu Yi would receive a reward of 100 coins. Liu Yi was surprised. He didn't understand the reason for that generosity. It was evident that the leader was someone very rich, but he didn't seem to care about that detail. If there was any ulterior motive behind that act, at least he would have the benefit of securing enough money to eat. He passed on the information to the group, and the President of New Order soon replied, saying that there was no issue with it. Satisfied, Liu Yi noticed that he was now part of the team. The invitation to officially join the team was made and accepted without objections. After that, a message was sent in the general chat for the other members to greet the new member. Wu Ji showed interest, asking if this would be the second player with support power besides him. After a brief exchange of greetings, the president arranged a meeting at the North Gate. Before leaving, Liu Yi grabbed a knife and reflected on his preparation. He decided that it would be wise to remove the headpiece and bring a regular weapon with him. In case something unexpected happened, he would have a way to protect himself. Additionally, he thought it would be better to keep the knife hidden. The uncertainty of that new environment could jeopardize his safety. When he arrived at the North Gate, he examined the team member list. Almost everyone was at level 50, except for the 2 players with support power. Moving a little further, Liu Yi spotted a crowd gathered. Blazing Fire was among them, arms crossed with a disgusted expression. The other players seemed curious and were closely watching the arrival of the new member. Wu Ji noticed his presence first, turning to wave excitedly. Liu Yi walked up to him and gave a brief introduction. The greeting was returned with a smile. Blazing Fire broke the silence, commenting that he had never met anyone with support power before. Now he had 2 right in front of him. Before they left for the uncontrolled zone, he said there was something he'd like to show everyone. Liu Yi observed him more carefully. The possibility that this was the President of New Order became more evident. If it were true, then he was in front of one of the most powerful people in that world. The President announced that before they set off, the 2 new members should demonstrate their abilities. The support players exchanged glances before Wu Ji stepped forward, offering to go first. Meanwhile, Liu Yi scratched the back of his neck, confused. It didn't make sense to have to prove his abilities there. The invitation to join the team had already been made. Still, the request was reinforced with the argument that the team would feel more confident about them. In light of this, Liu Yi nodded, understanding the reasoning behind the demand. Wu Ji then approached Blazing Fire and shared what he had learned about his own ability. He explained that the activation range of the power depended on the range of the weapon he used. To demonstrate, he raised his hand and explained that his gloves had an attack range of 1 to 2 meters. Because of this, if he was beyond that limit, his abilities wouldn't have an effect. Blazing Fire quickly understood, commenting that the relationship between the weapon and ability made sense. Liu Ye, in turn, was surprised by that revelation. If Wu Ji's gloves had such a short range and he himself used a gun, what would be the actual limit of his ability? He had never stopped to think about that before. His powers always worked without him meaning to calculate the distance. Suddenly, he felt uneasy. While pondering that, Wu Ji began demonstrating his abilities. First, he activated a recovery power. Next, he used the second technique, called Mantra. He explained that this ability could be used against bosses, as it caused weakening, aging, and deceleration effects. Then he demonstrated the third ability, temporarily chaining the hands of the President of New Order. He informed that this technique was called Silence, capable of restricting any enemy, including bosses. To finish, he said he would leave his fourth ability as a trump card for more critical situations. Blazing Fire watched everything with a satisfied smile. Meanwhile, Liu Yi concluded that he would follow the same strategy. He would reveal only 3 useful abilities to the team, keeping the 4th secret. When his turn came, he stepped forward and explained that he used a blade with a 3-meter attack range greater than Wu Ji's. He repeated the recovery ability demonstration, followed by the second technique called Blessing. The third ability was Prison. To demonstrate, he applied the technique to the President, who was completely immobilized. The ability was deactivated quickly, and Liu Yi explained that the effect lasted about 10 seconds, although he couldn't guarantee it would work on bosses. Additionally, he mentioned that the Blessing could remove any negative condition, including his own prison. Just like Wu Ji, he kept his 4th ability secret. At the end of the demonstration, he exchanged a glance with Wu Ji, noticing the confidence reflected in the other player's eyes. Blazing Fire absorbed all the information before declaring that he understood both of their capabilities. With that clarified, he announced that they could finally set off. Turning to the other members, he made an announcement. Due to the lack of players with support power, the group had always been limited to the peripheral areas of the uncontrolled zone. However, now that they had 2 holders of this power, they could venture deeper into the region and explore its secrets. The players received his words with enthusiasm, raising their fists in a gesture of determination before departing. Liu Yi observed the scene and began to reflect. The rewards obtained from exploring the Chaos Zone and the Uncontrolled Zone were practically the same. However, the danger level was different. He wondered what made the Uncontrolled Zone special, why the president of New Order insisted on exploring it, and if something hidden was there. His train of thought was interrupted when he realized he had stopped walking. Wu Ji noticed his hesitation and waved, catching his attention. Liu Yi resumed his steps, smiling at him before continuing to walk with the group. However, as he moved forward, his expression slowly turned serious. For him, there was only room for one support player in that team. It was only a matter of time before Wu Ji was eliminated. And when that happened, Liu Yi would be the only holder of that power in the team. When they arrived at the entrance of the Uncontrolled Zone, the players were faced with the decaying landscape that awaited them. Tall, ruined buildings sprawled everywhere, creating a dark and oppressive scene. The team captain took the lead, explaining the specifics of this area in comparison to the Chaos Zone and the Dangerous Zone. The main difference was that the difficulty in the Uncontrolled Zone was determined by the number of team members. For this reason, their group consisted of 10 people. However, even though this was the minimum number allowed, the difficulty would still be equivalent to that of a squad made up of 80 combatants. Therefore, they had to remain vigilant at all times and never act recklessly. Additionally, the captain warned them that eliminating monsters in this region did not grant rewards. With that in mind, upon encountering them, the priority should be to find shelter immediately. If there was no safe place nearby, they should attempt to distract the monsters. If necessary, sacrificing some team members to ensure the survival of the others would be required. A heavy silence settled among the players after this declaration. Without further delay, the captain jumped ahead with swift agility, leaping from one of the buildings. Without hesitation, the other players followed suit, jumping after him. Liu Yi, on the other hand, crouched for a brief moment, analyzing the surrounding environment. Then he propelled himself forward and also jumped. As he neared the ground, he noticed that the darkness thickened around him. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he lifted his gaze to the sky. A lightning bolt illuminated the horizon between the destroyed buildings. When he glanced to the side, he spotted the rest of the team members, and close to them, a monster perched atop a semi-destroyed building. The creature, upon noticing the players, let out a deafening roar. Liu Yi frowned, assessing the situation. Blazing Fire, maintaining his composure, ordered those with camouflage abilities to use them immediately. The players quickly reacted, scattering in search of hiding spots. As soon as they began to run, the monster jumped off the roof and started to chase them. However, before it could get closer, a second creature appeared out of nowhere, grabbing the first monster with brutal force. The captured creature let out a shrill scream as it was crushed in the larger predator's grip, then violently thrown out of the building. The new threat didn't hesitate and began running after the group. One of the players, upon hearing sounds from behind, instinctively turned to check. His eyes widened as he saw a colossal monster in pursuit. Recognizing the creature, he shouted to the president of the Nova Order, alerting him. A man-eating leopard was hunting them. What should have been a simple entry into the Uncontrolled Zone had turned into a disaster. Blazing Fire, maintaining his cool, warned them not to panic. He ordered them to continue trying to avoid direct confrontation as much as possible. The group ran into a narrow alley, attempting to outmaneuver the creature. Wu Ji, intrigued, asked about the true strength of the monster. In response, one of the guild members explained that on a previous occasion, 10 squads had been sent into the Uncontrolled Zone to gather information. 5 of those groups were annihilated by a single beast of the species. Despite such alarming information, Wu Ji remained skeptical. The creature, on the other hand, seemed to have understood the group's escape route. Instead of following them directly, it took a shortcut, tearing through a building's wall and appearing before the players at the end of the alley. Blazing Fire, without hesitation, called out to one of the team members, a blindfolded man, and ordered him to distract the monster. The player immediately stopped and complied with the order, activating his taunt ability. The effect would last for 1 minute, reducing the leopard's speed by 10%, but increasing its attack power. As soon as the ability took effect, the monster abruptly halted its charge, focusing its attention on the new target. The player then ran in the opposite direction of the group, drawing the creature with him. Wu Ji observed the scene closely, reflecting on what could be gained from this situation. Then he shifted his gaze to Liu Yi, his expression growing even more serious. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and activated his marking ability on him. From that moment on, Liu Yi would be within the perception range of all creatures within a radius of 1,000 meters. The effect would last exactly 10 minutes. As soon as the ability was activated, all the monsters in the area immediately turned their attention to Liu Yi. The manic leopard, which had been distracted by the blind player, suddenly stopped. The player cursed, confused, and exclaimed why the creature had stopped following him. Meanwhile, Liu Yi continued running, unaware of anything unusual. However, a monster suddenly jumped at him. With no time to react, he tried to grab it, but the force of the charge charge caused him to lose control. The beast threw him brutally against a wall. The impact was violent. The other players, noticing the movement, stopped and looked back. At the sight, they exclaimed in shock. Monsters were coming from all directions, converging directly on Liu Yi. Confusion overtook the group. They didn't understand why, suddenly, all the creatures were focused on him. It was then that Liu Yi shone with fire, and his gaze met Wuji's. The smile on the player's face revealed his intentions. Liu Yi immediately understood what had happened. Without hesitation, blazing fire sprinted toward Liu Yi. He ordered the others to return to the original shelter and said he would try to rescue him. The team members called out to him, confused by his decision. As he ran, Wuji observed him and thought that he was completely insane. At this pace, he wouldn't return alive. He told the others that blazing fire seemed determined, but now Liu Yi had become a burden to the team. One of the players wanted to protest, but his attention was diverted by the sound of buildings collapsing. The man-eating leopard was back. It seemed to have shaken off the taunt effect. With no other choice, the rest of the group decided to return to the shelter. Meanwhile, blazing fire continued running toward Liu Yi. At the same time, he monitored his health bar. He ordered him not to think about dying there. Suddenly, a monster jumped from one side. Blazing fire noticed the attack and quickly drew his sword. With a swift strike, he tried to cut the creature's chest. However, the attack didn't even scratch the beast's skin. He was surprised to realize how resistant the monster's defenses were. The creature retaliated with a violent swipe of its claws. Blazing fire gritted his teeth and blocked the attack, but he was forced to retreat. He pulled back, observing the monsters crowding around Liu Yi. The number of enemies was overwhelming. For a moment, he thought he wouldn't be able to save him. But then something caught his attention. Among the stiffened bodies of the beasts, he noticed that Liu Yi was still resisting. The monsters were holding him by the arms and legs, but he wasn't giving in. Liu Yi activated his freezing ability on himself. The system immediately notified that the cognition power was not being consumed at that moment. His health points were 5,036 out of a total of 8,040. Only 10 seconds remained before the freedom status expired. Without hesitation, Liu Yi activated the blessing ability. He spent all of his knowledge power points and increased his attributes by 1,406. His stats exceeded 1,000 points, and in some cases, they reached over 6,000. The blessing spread through his body, dissipating the effect of the mark. He clenched his fist around the handle of his katana. The system notified that his energy had risen to 2,712 points and that his attack power increased by 50%. With a swift motion, Liu Yi swung his blade. All the monsters around him were cut down in a single strike. At the same time, the man-eating leopard advanced. The creature passed by blazing fire, knocking down walls in its path. Liu Yi noticed its approach in time. He grabbed the beast's claw at the last second, trying to contain it. The impact caused his feet to slide along the ground. He resisted. Quickly changing his strategy, Liu Yi switched his katana for a pendulum gun. He used the stunning effect and aimed the weapon at the monster's head. The moment the creature prepared to attack him, he pulled the trigger. The shot hit dead on. Taking advantage of the opening, he switched to a conventional model and began firing non-stop. The bullets repeatedly struck the leopard's body. Finally, the creature gave way. With a loud crash, a monster fell to the ground, unconscious. Liu Yi climbed onto the beast's corpse and looked around with confidence. Under his feet, the leopard's body began to disappear. Blazing fire, motionless, watched everything in shock. His voice trembled as he muttered that Liu Yi was a liar. After all, how could a support player possess such strength? The system notified that only 50 seconds remained until the blessing effect ended. Liu Yi immediately ran toward the president, who was still confused. Without wasting time, he said they needed to leave. Then he continued running. Blazing fire, noticing a group of monsters ahead, snapped out of his shock and chased after him. While following, he shouted for Liu Yi to wait for him. At the shelter, the rest of the team remained at the entrance of the dungeon, taking cover. One of the members commented that he had no idea what was going on with their president. He wasn't even sending messages, possibly afraid of not getting a response. Another player agreed with this observation. Wuji, intrigued, asked why they didn't just go back. After all, which player could survive under these conditions? One of the men responded that the president and Liu Yi were still alive. If their health bars hadn't decreased, it was because they were using abilities that temporarily blocked damage. However, Liu Yi seemed particularly unlucky. No one knew exactly what had happened, but for some reason, he had attracted a large number of monsters from which escape was impossible. This was a real problem. After saying this, the man crossed his arms and gritted his teeth in frustration. Suddenly, one of the comrades exclaimed. They had appeared on the map not far from the shelter. Wuji was surprised by the news. The others in turn became excited. Eager, he warned the group that the two might bring monsters with them. He ordered everyone to prepare to defend the shelter. The team members positioned themselves at the entrance, weapons in hand. One of them commented that he didn't hear any loud sounds approaching. Shortly after, the guild president entered the shelter alongside Liu Yi. The group, relieved, celebrated the return of the two. The only exception was Wuji. He watched them with a serious expression. In his mind, implying that President was a major problem. Meanwhile, the players began praising Blazing Fire. They said he was incredible, that he managed to handle an extremely difficult situation and still save Liu Yi. They stated that he truly deserved his title. Blazing Fire, however, remained silent. His gaze fixed on the back of Liu Yi revealed something different. After the two moved away from the group and walked to the back of the shelter, they sat on concrete blocks. It was then that the president finally broke the silence. He said that all those pleasantries were unnecessary. They needed to rest for a bit and then head for the dungeon. The players agreed with him and became excited. Meanwhile, Wu Ji observed Liu Yi, who remained serious. Intrigued, he approached and sat next to him. With a smile, he asked how Liu Yi had managed to escape. He thought it had been quite an exciting adventure. Liu Yi looked away and for a moment remembered when the system dispelled the mark ability. Without hesitation, he replied that Wu Ji knew very well the reason, since it was his doing. Wu Ji shuddered at hearing those words. Nervously, he waved his hand and asked, trying to disguise it, what Liu Yi meant by that. Liu Yi kept his gaze steady and said he found it strange that Wu Ji didn't know. He explained that the blessing was an ability capable of removing any negative effect, including the mark that had been placed on him. Wu Ji's eyes widened in surprise. Liu Yi continued, stating that the mark was a level 40 ability. Only 2 people there were capable of using it. Silence hung between the 2 of them. Liu Yi drew a weapon. With a cold expression, he revealed that from the moment he entered, he had already considered ending Wu Ji. However, upon talking to him, he realized something. Wu Ji's indecision wasn't from fear, but from his determination. He slowly stood up and pointed the weapon directly at Wu Ji. With a firm voice, he said that there was only one way to resolve this. Wu Ji stood still in silence. Wu Ji exclaimed loudly, surprised by what was happening. To him, this was absurd. They were allies, not enemies. The rest of the team remained alert, watching the conflict unfold, not fully understanding the situation. Meanwhile, Wu Ji wore a cynical smile. He found it ironic that Liu Yi was about to be killed with a weapon, like something out of a movie. To him, this scene only reinforced the need to isolate Liu Yi from the team. Moreover, if the mark ability was level 40 and only 2 people could use it, then Liu Yi was sure that Wu Ji was the one responsible for activating it. One of the players, outraged, shouted at Liu Yi, questioning his actions. However, Blazing Fire remained seated, not intervening. Liu Yi simply observed, a slight smile on his face. Wu Ji, still trying to defend himself, pounded his chest and said that he had only asked how Liu Yi escaped the monsters, and suddenly had a weapon pointed at him. His expression showed indignation as he turned to the president, seeking support. He wanted to know if this was really acceptable within the team. Blazing Fire remained silent. Wu Ji insisted, pointing out that Liu Yi probably wanted to kill him just for being another support fighter. If that happened, he would be the only one with that power. Wu Ji feared that Liu Yi would start imposing his own conditions and that the president would eventually give in to them to cross the dungeon. To him, this was all wrong. He then looked at the others and demanded their attention. He'd want everyone to realize that Liu Yi was a dead weight and had no right to remain in the team. Liu Ye, for his part, continued to observe calmly. To him, the situation was clear. Wu Ji was the real culprit behind all of this. Turning back to the president, Wu Ji insisted that he needed to be replaced. One of the team members tried to intervene, suggesting that they leave the discussion for later when they were safe. However, Blazing Fire stood up and placed his hand on the player's shoulder, stopping him. His gesture indicated that the conflict needed to be resolved right there. Wu Ji became even more anxious. To him, Blazing Fire was completely mistaken. It was then that the president moved forward and firmly grabbed Liu Yi's weapon, forcing him to release it. His gaze was full of disapproval as he stared at Wu Ji, demanding an explanation. For a moment, Wu Ji hesitated, unsure how to react. Still confused, he felt a sudden pressure on his neck. The president had grabbed him tightly. The question came harshly. Why was he constantly trying to create disharmony among the team members? The tight grip made it hard for him to breathe, and Wu Ji wondered where the president got so much strength. Trying to catch his breath, he gritted his teeth and asked what exactly was happening. Blazing Fire, without releasing his hold on his throat, confidently stated that he trusted Liu Yi far more than Wu Ji could imagine. Wu Ji, still in disbelief, argued that he didn't understand the situation. After all, it was Liu Yi who had pointed the weapon first. But his justification was ignored. The president then activated his ability. His voice was firm as he stated that Liu Yi would never have done that without reason. Shock overtook Wu Ji. He couldn't believe the president trusted Liu Yi so much that he disregarded his words. To him, this was unfair. He hadn't done anything wrong. But before he could say anything else, the Shadow Blood Shell ability was activated. A thick red liquid enveloped him completely, trapping him inside the bloody shell. His body was sealed and his life began to drain gradually. He tried to activate a recovery ability, but he realized in desperation that he was completely blocked. As his health drained away, Wu Ji started to panic. Staggering, he tried to approach Liu Yi, and in a last desperate act, grabbed his throat. His eyes were filled with terror, his breathing uneven. Then suddenly, his body went still. The last breath escaped his lungs. Without strength, he collapsed to his knees. His health reached 0. In an instant, he disappeared. The bloody shell dissipated, spreading across the ground before returning a blazing fire. Liu Yi, who had watched everything, finally broke the silence, calling for his companion. Then he sat down and murmured a thank you, smiling faintly. His mind revisited the moments when he faced all those monsters alone. An unsettling thought crossed his mind. If he hadn't done that, perhaps he would have been forced to kill all his teammates. After a few moments of silence, Blazing Fire turned to Liu Yi. With a serious look, he made an unexpected proposal. He wanted Liu Yi to join the New Order. Then he completed his statement with a promise. Within the guild, he would have the highest position. Blazing Fire apologized for having killed Wu Ji earlier. He was aware of the contradictions within the New Order's members, but he believed that recruiting a strong player like Liu Yi would allow them to overlook past conflicts. The guild members were surprised by the president's request. He had never shown such hesitation when inviting someone to the New Order before. Moreover, he was offering exceptional conditions, something unprecedented. One of the players commented that all the guild members had gone through various stages of selection. He didn't understand what made Liu Yi so special to deserve a direct invitation. Liu Yi, on the other hand, asked an unexpected question. What was the cost? Blazing Fire showed surprise at the question. Before he could answer, one of the players intervened, questioning the absurdity of such a question. To him, it was more logical for Liu Yi to first understand the benefits before thinking about the costs. However, Liu Yi explained that when joining a guild, one should not only consider the positives. The most important thing was to understand the price to pay. The guild president maintained a confident gaze at Liu Yi. Then he lowered his head and smiled. He said that Liu Yi wouldn't have to pay anything. However, Liu Yi didn't believe the answer. He knew that when the bill came, he would hardly be willing to accept it. The true price was the willingness to sacrifice everything when the guild needed it, including unlimited levels and valuable equipment. In exchange, he would receive a generous compensation. Liu Yi frowned and looked at him with distrust. To him, crossing the dungeon of the uncontrolled zone would inevitably result in a massacre. His words had an immediate impact. The president and the guild members became alert. After a few moments of hesitation, Blazing Fire nervously responded that he didn't believe in such an outcome. He stated that the probability was minimal. Liu Yi, however, didn't seem convinced. He said that many promises had been made without any guarantee of fulfillment. Blazing Fire remained silent, observing him closely. Liu Yi continued, stating that he was willing to form an alliance but would never give up his equipment or his level. Moreover, he would never play with anyone after that dungeon. The players considered his words an affront. To them, Liu Yi had no understanding of the magnitude of that offer. The annual compensation of guild members exceeded 2 million. The only price to pay was to give up one's own equipment during the game. In their view, Liu Yi could only be a fool or a lunatic. Blazing Fire, however, simply sat on a concrete block and sighed. He recognized that it was a shame to lose such a promising player, but he also understood that not everything revolved around the New Order. The Syndicate was still a viable option. Liu Yi smiled and thanked him for his understanding. While observing Blazing Fire's calm expression, his thoughts drifted to the past. If he hadn't lived through so much stress and understood the true importance of equipment and levels for survival, maybe his decision would have been different. With his current strength, even the president of the New Order was personally inviting him to join the guild. For many, that would be a great opportunity. Looking down, Liu Yi reflected on this possibility. For a moment, he felt a slight regret for rejecting the offer. However, he soon brushed those thoughts away. With a discreet smile, he reminded himself that there was no need to apologize. The only reason the president wanted to recruit him was for his strength. If he continued to grow and stay alive, more and more people would seek him out. Meanwhile, Blazing Fire watched the chat window with a grim expression. In the chat, a player named Beishu wished everyone good luck. He wrote that the first dungeon of the uncontrolled zone would be special. It would have 10% of the computational power of the membrane. After a few moments, he added that one of the conditions to perfectly complete a special dungeon was to face a desperate situation. He also mentioned that he had completely failed in the last attempt. Not only had he not passed, but all his allies had died. Now he didn't even know how long it would take to recruit new members. Reading this message, the president gritted his teeth. He mentally cursed, reflecting on the implications of that information. If one of the conditions for passing really involved a desperate situation, then everything could get even more complicated. His gaze shifted to Liu Yi. He thought he had failed in the first step by trying to bribe him, but he knew that his strength was still an essential trump card. He needed to keep insisting. Meanwhile, in the chat, Sino commented that they seemed to be on the move. He stated that the group was heading to an uncontrolled zone in search of the computational power membrane. Baishu added that 50% of that power was available. He said that soon they would see how much each one could take for themselves. Chino intervened, mentioning that both the Chaos Zone and the Danger Zone also had 10% of this power. However, he didn't think it was worth investing in them. Another player reinforced this idea, explaining that the cost-benefit ratio was better in the uncontrolled zone. There you could obtain 10% of the computational power at once. In the Danger Zone and the Chaos Zone, only 1% could be acquired per attempt, though the difficulty level was the same. Suan Shu suggested sending players who could handle the situation in the best possible way. This information made the president reflect. Maybe it would be better to recruit a player who knew how to work well with a team like Strikes. If a massacre really did occur and Liu Yi refused to cooperate, cooperate, he would have to resort to strikes to eliminate him. Deep down, he hoped things wouldn't come to that point. After that, they continued their journey. Liu Yi reflected that by temporarily joining the New Order's team, he would have the opportunity to witness the full strength of the guild in action. This way, the attack on the dungeons of the uncontrolled zone could begin. The team consisted of a central tank, a player known as Fresh Meat Fan, in addition to a support tank who was the president of the New Order himself. There was also a support fighter who never removed his blindfold and a damage dealer who wielded twin swords with lethal precision. Furthermore, a damage collection specialist eliminated monsters stealthily, playing a crucial role in the team. With impeccable coordination, the group took only 4 hours to clear a level 50 dungeon. As they delved deeper into the uncontrolled zone, the number of dungeons cleared increased. On a 4th day, the group had completed 12 dungeons. It was then that Liu Yi reached level 50. The achievement brought satisfaction, especially because upon reaching this level, he unlocked the special skill Level 50 Rebirth Power. Before him, 2 skills were available for selection: Cooldown Reset and Scan. The first skill allows the reset of the cooldown for all other skills, but it had a 12-hour cooldown. The second skill allowed scanning the map of the area within a 1,000-meter radius, identifying resources, living creatures, and nearby players. However, every hour, 100 cognition points were consumed, 10 points per second. This skill had no cooldown, and every 10 levels, the scan radius increased by 100 meters. On the 3rd day in the uncontrolled zone, Liu Yi had reached level 50. On the 6th day, the team finally found what the guild president had been searching for. Upon spotting the portal to the special dungeon of the uncontrolled zone, Blazing Fire couldn't contain his joy. Soon after, a new player appeared to replace Wuji, who had died previously. Before that, the guild president had to temporarily invite a second-tier member to fill the spot. Meanwhile, Strikes was running through the narrow streets between ruined buildings. With a precise jump, he propelled himself off the ground and landed on top of a building, where a team was waiting for him at the entrance of the dungeon. He paused for a moment and looked around. Currently at level 56, it was clear that his presence energized the team members. As soon as he arrived, everyone expressed relief. Strike smiled and gave a thumbs up before teasing them. He said that he had already warned those brainless chickens not to move ahead without him. The smiles of the players immediately disappeared. For a few seconds, no one said anything until one of them retorted, reminding him that the same rule applied to him. Strikes just laughed, then waved at the guild president and cleared his throat, trying to mask his embarrassment. He said no one had informed him about the situation. Blazing Fire remained silent, giving him a tired look. Liu Yi, who had been observing the scene closely, analyzed the newcomer. He recognized that this was Strikes, one of the 5 best players in Met World before his reincarnation. Moreover, he had already defeated a copy of Strikes in the Mirror Realm. However, he wasn't sure just how strong he was compared to his real version. While Liu Yi pondered, Strikes finally turned his attention to one of the team members. He approached the support player and stopped beside him. Strikes then asked if he was the so-called Liu Yi. The player looked at him and smiled. He said that the guild president had mentioned that Shine was strong enough to be compared to Strike's little toe. Upon hearing this, Blazing Fire and the other team members became visibly tense. Liu Yi frowned. If Strikes was comparing him to a little toe, then maybe it would be necessary to tear it off. He just hoped he wouldn't have to pay with his own life. Blazing Fire interrupted the conversation, scolding Strikes. He asked him to stop talking nonsense. Strikes, for his part, apologized to Liu Yi, explaining that he had the habit of saying impulsive things, but that his temperament wasn't bad. He then looked at the guild president and added that if Liu Yi was truly as strong as his little toe, then that was a good thing. Before he could say anything further, Blazing Fire raised a finger and ordered the others to take him to the dungeon. The players grabbed Strikes and dragged him to the portal. They said that since he was so powerful, he should go first and prove his words in practice. Strikes protested, stating that he wasn't like them and didn't need to be pushed. Blazing Fire watched the team depart inside. He wondered how he had managed to get that man into the guild. Now alone with Liu Yi, he turned his attention back to the dungeon entrance. Before them stood the portal to the long-awaited special dungeon of the uncontrolled zone. To calm his excitement, Blazing Fire took a deep breath before turning to Liu Yi. He told him that the true goal of the new order in this area was this dungeon. No matter what happened during the raid, the guild would be in debt to Liu Yi. Liu Yi was surprised by this declaration. It only increased his curiosity. What exactly was the guild president looking for inside this special dungeon? Blazing Fire, without taking his eyes off the portal, exuded confidence. After a moment, he took a few steps forward and ordered Liu Yi to follow him. Before entering the dungeon, Liu Yi reflected on his situation. In his previous life, he never had the chance to communicate directly with the president of the New Order. As a low-level player at the time, all he knew were rumors, stories describing the guild leader as a ruthless man indifferent to the lives of others. However, after spending several days under his leadership, Liu Yi began to realize that the reality was more complex than he had imagined. For a brief moment, he considered the possibility that they could become friends, but he quickly dismissed the thought. True friendships only emerged between those with similar interests, and what he felt now was nothing more than a reflection of the temporary pleasure of teamwork. Deep down, he knew that if a conflict arose between him and the New Order, there would be no room for camaraderie. The only person he could trust was his sister. If circumstances forced them to be on opposing sides, he would have to accept the guild as his enemy and fight with everything he had to survive. With this resolution in mind, he crossed the portal. The moment he did, the environment around him abruptly changed. The scene unfolding before him was not real. It was a memory embedded in the location. Two figures watched with satisfaction as something moved inside an incubation chamber. The creature had successfully been born. After removing it from the incubator, the scientists confined it to a secluded room to monitor its growth. One of them, excited, commented on the success of the experiment, praising the power of technology. The director of the Research Institute, satisfied with the progress, inquired about the brainwashing process applied to the creature. The response was not encouraging. All the methods tested so far had only served to make the creature even more agitated. Suddenly, without warning, the creature began to move at an alarming speed. Before the scientists could react, the monster broke the containment glass and charged toward the director. Among the scattered fragments on the floor, its reflection revealed a terrifying image. In the chaos, one of the scientists, badly injured, crawled to a table and, with the little strength he had left, warned the others to prevent the creature's escape. The director, overwhelmed with fear, made a desperate decision. He stood up abruptly and, with a shout full of urgency, declared that they needed to destroy it. He then pressed a large red button. The scene shifted once again, bringing Liu Yi and the rest of the team back to reality. Now they were standing atop a mountain, facing the entrance to the Research Institute. The group paused for a moment, analyzing the location. Liu Yi recognized the familiar pattern, another special dungeon with cutscenes integrated into the narrative. While observing, Blazing Fire reviewed the information the system provided about the mission. The interface confirmed that the dungeon mission had been generated and that teleportation was disabled. Mission: an experiment gone out of control. The objective was to transport the life source of the Screaming Serpent to membrane number 304, located at the core of the Research Institute, for the incubation of ancient organisms. However, the mission had strict rules. The life source could not be removed from the player's inventory. Their lives were directly connected to the item. Anyone who broke the bottle would die immediately. In a matter of seconds, each player saw a bottle materialize in their hands. Blazing Fire assessed the situation and concluded that everyone had received the life source. In order for them to succeed, the ideal would be to reach their destination without any casualties. Taking a deep breath, the guild leader indicated that it was time to move forward. Liu Yi gripped the bottle firmly, examining it carefully. Until that moment, he had only participated in 2 dungeons with cutscenes, one of them during a special mission alongside YXC. As the group prepared to move ahead, no one noticed the presence hovering above them. High above, a shadow moved silently, watching every step they took. The calm was broken by a deafening scream. A colossal serpent suddenly appeared, its voice reverberating across the mountain. The group immediately turned around, feeling a chill run through their bodies as they faced the creature. Blazing Fire reacted quickly, attempting to coordinate the players, instructing them to form a combat formation. However, before they could react, the serpent released a second scream, this time unleashing a powerful sound wave. The impact was devastating. Several players fell to their knees, dropping their bottles to the ground while clutching their ears in agony. The moment the glass of the bottles shattered on the floor, the bodies of their bearers began to dissolve rapidly. The system soon announced the tragic result. 3 team members have died. Observing the fragments scattered on the ground, his gaze hardened. He realized that they had lost 3 bottles. The system notified Liu Yi of the condition that had been imposed on him. Watching the creature closely, he noticed that Strikes was already moving toward it. The warrior seemed determined to face the serpent on his own. He ignored any caution. The team, noticing his impulsive movement, reacted with concern. After losing 3 members, no one wanted to witness another death. Strikes showed no hesitation and charged toward the monster with impressive speed. His intention was clear. He wanted to avenge the companions who had perished. The impact of his strike was powerful. To his surprise, the blade caused no visible damage to the serpent. Before he could react, the creature opened its enormous mouth. In a quick and precise movement, it swallowed him whole. The rest of the team watched the scene in shock. Some had already expected a similar outcome. Others were speechless at the speed with which they had lost yet another member. Showing no further interest in the remaining players, the serpent retreated. It disappeared into the forest. It was then that a detail caught the attention of the guild leader. The liquid inside the bottles of the deceased players began to distribute among the remaining bottles. He quickly understood what this meant. To complete the mission flawlessly, it wasn't necessary for everyone to reach the destination, only for the 10 parts of the life source to be delivered. Meanwhile, some players continued to discuss Strikes. The possibility that he was still alive was raised. Upon checking the team list, they confirmed that his name remained active. This indicated that he was still inside the serpent. Perhaps there was a way to rescue him. Faced with the uncertainty of how to deal with the monster, some team members began discussing strategies. The guild leader quickly ended the conversation. He seemed confident that if Strikes had survived up to that point, he still still had a chance to escape. The most important thing at that moment was to head to the Research Institute and complete the mission. Liu Yi analyzed the situation carefully. The guild leader's actions reinforced his suspicions that he was seeking a perfect execution of the dungeon. The memory of when he himself had received 1% computational power for a flawless move came to mind. He began to question whether Blazing Fire was after the same benefit. With no other option, the group continued their journey. They maintained a fast pace toward the Institute. 20 minutes later, as they neared the destination, one of the players checked the team's map. He made a concerning discovery. Strikes was on the move. He was moving at an abnormal speed. At first, they thought he might be running to catch up with them, but soon they realized something was wrong. The conclusion came almost immediately. It wasn't Strikes who was moving, but rather the creature that had swallowed him. The warning came too late. Suddenly, one of the players noticed movement in the nearby bushes. He alerted the guild leader. Blazing Fire halted his steps immediately. He turned just in time to see a screaming serpent emerging from the vegetation. Its mouth was wide open, ready to strike. Reacting with speed, he activated the Blood Shadow skill. He dodged the attack at the last moment. Once he repositioned himself, he quickly assessed the situation. He ordered the players to take their combat positions. At the same time, he instructed that Strikes attack the creature from the inside, in case he was still alive. The serpent, sensing the movement around it, redirected its attention to the players. The players decided to attack the serpent together. As they advanced, they struck blows against the monster, but their attacks didn't seem to have any effect. The creature, seemingly impenetrable, remained unscathed. Suddenly, the snake violently swung its tail. Several players were thrown to the sides, hitting the ground with force. They quickly recovered, restoring their health. Meanwhile, one of the fighters used a whip to strike the creature's face. He was trying to distract it while using a provocation skill, moving from side to side. Without hesitation, he ran in the opposite direction of the others, quickly passing by the guild leader who was waiting for a chance to face the monster. The serpent then let out a deafening roar. Sound waves spread across the battlefield. One of the players didn't have time to react. His bauble shattered immediately. In an instant, his body began to disintegrate. Terrified, he realized that his death was inevitable. The rest of the group shouted his name, but nothing could be done. Blazing Fire and Liu Yi silently observed the spot where their teammate had been just seconds before. The impact of the loss was evident. Another team member, still shaken, brought news about Strikes. The player trapped inside the serpent reported that its internal defense was incredibly resistant. He couldn't harm it from within. Blazing Fire turned his gaze back to the opposing creature. Up close, he noticed a peculiar detail. The structure of the monster resembled an insect more than a snake. This explained its abnormal resistance. Liu Yi quickly realized the greatest danger of the situation. Since the baubles couldn't be stored in the inventory, the serpent simply destroyed them with its sound waves. Each strike was a direct threat to everyone's lives. The tension increased. The possibility that nearly the entire team could perish at the beginning of the dungeon seemed real. Silence filled the air for a moment. Without warning, the screaming serpent began to move again. To everyone's surprise, it turned around and disappeared into the forest. The players were confused. Why would the creature leave them alive after eliminating two of them? As they tried to find an explanation, they noticed that the liquid from the shattered bottle had been redistributed among the remaining vials. The tone of the fluid had become brighter. Blazing Fire analyzed the situation and began to form a hypothesis. The monster wasn't just attacking randomly, it was somehow testing them. If the perfect passage was truly the guild leader's goal, Liu Yi pondered what would be necessary to achieve it. Killing the serpent might not be the way. The real objective could be to connect all the remaining life sources. Blazing Fire ordered everyone to stay alert. Now that the monster had moved away, they had a chance to reach the Research Institute. Without wasting time, they set off. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a huge building. There was a large hole in the wall, indicating that something had escaped from there. One of the players checked the map and alerted the guild leader. The serpent was still nearby. Blazing Fire quickly assessed the situation. To buy time, he made a drastic decision. He ordered one of the players to break their own bottle. The chosen player hesitated, surprised by the command. Another player intervened, arguing that they couldn't afford to lose anyone else. Blazing Fire, however, was firm. With a large number of players, defeating the creature would be impossible. What they needed now was speed, not brute force. If they could drive the serpent away, they wouldn't have time to explore the Institute. Faced with the imposed decision, the player gritted his teeth and broke his bottle. The system notified the death of another team member. As soon as the bottle shattered, the screaming serpent immediately turned in the opposite direction. The strategy had worked. They had distracted the monster. The players continued on their path, relieved. One of them, excited, praised the brilliance of the plan. Another said they should thank the captain. Thanks to him, they now had a way to track the movements of the dungeon boss. Blazing Fire checked the map and confirmed his theory. Meanwhile, Liu Yi began to reflect. Earlier, he had refused to spend money on equipment and levels. Now, if Blazing Fire knew how to get perfect passage, he could become a target as soon as they reached the Institute. In that kind of environment, surrounding him would be easy. Blazing Fire ordered them to hurry. The entrance to the Institute was now in sight. The group ran through the clearing that led to the building. Reaching the stairs, they quickly advanced toward the entrance. Liu Yi, however, suddenly stopped. A thought crossed his mind. He couldn't allow them to surround him inside. The other players noticed his hesitation. They stopped at the top of the stairs and asked what was happening. Without looking away, Liu Yi turned to Blazing Fire. He asked a single question. What was the easiest way to finish this mission? Everyone listened but said nothing, thinking that he should prepare for a battle against them. The president furrowed his brow and walked to the edge of the stairs. With a serious tone, he stated that Liu Yi was mistaken. The level of this dungeon was extremely high, and he had no intention of harming him. His only goal was to complete the mission. If Liu Yi didn't trust him, he could wait outside while the three of them completed the task. Despite the unknown dangers inside the Institute, the threat from the serpent outside was far greater. Liu Yi remained silent, evaluating the situation. One of the players called out to him, questioning his hesitation. He wanted to know what made Liu Yi distrust the president. He thought it was an absurd joke. Another player agreed, reminding that they had cooperated for a long time. There was no reason to doubt now. Did Liu Yi really think the president should treat him like a brother? Liu Yi furrowed his brow, weighing his options. Discreetly, he glanced at the map. According to the calculations, strikes would arrive in about 10 minutes. The serpent attacked every 20 minutes, meaning the next attack would happen in 13 minutes. If he wanted to act, he had to do so before the president met with strikes. Blazing Fire turned toward the entrance and, with a calm smile, stated that no one would be forced into anything. They just needed to complete the mission. With that, he entered the Institute. The other players, irritated, insulted Liu Yi. They called him a traitor and said they couldn't trust him at such a crucial moment. They would proceed without him. Liu Yi drew his katana and assessed his chances. The freezing status lasted 10 seconds. The blessing remained active for 60. Considering strikes, 4 opponents had significant combat power. If he used freezing along with the blessing, he would have a chance to defeat them. If he made a mistake, he would lose his alliance with the New Order Guild. If he hesitated, all his efforts would be wasted. Blazing Fire noticed his indecision and turned around, furrowing his brow. The guild members questioned Liu Yi with disdain. Did he really intend to attack them? Besides the alliance, his life was already practically lost. They wouldn't dirty their hands to kill him. Liu Yi felt that the answer was clear. Without hesitation, he activated the freezing status and the blessing. His strength and speed increased dramatically. In an instant, he shot toward the guild president, who activated a skill. Blazing Fire's body disappeared before his eyes. The players shouted, incredulous at Liu Yi's decision. They claimed he was making a grave mistake and wouldn't last long. Before they could react, Liu Yi swung his katana and cut one of the players in half. The victim's body fell to the ground. Before disappearing, the player murmured, stunned that it wasn't possible. The system notified the death of a team member. Another player charged forward furiously, moving back and forth in an attempt to deceive him. Liu Yi waited for the right moment. He firmed his grip on the weapon, advanced, and delivered a precise strike. The system once again notified the death of a team member. Liu Yi checked the map. Blazing Fire was still in the same spot. Strikes, however, was getting closer. Liu Yi gathered all of his strength and attacked with ferocity, breaking part of the building's side. Debris fell all around. Looking around, he checked the president's health bar. His HP was still full. This meant that despite the impact, he hadn't managed to hit him. He checked the map once more. Blazing Fire was still there, but there were no signs of him among the debris. What skill was that? Liu Yi then realized strikes was very close. A system notified that the freezing status had expired. Looking at the debris in front of him, Liu Yi yelled out challengingly, calling the president. He asked if he was just a coward, incapable of facing him directly. Blazing Fire remained silent, not revealing himself. The system then notified that the blessing time had also expired. Liu Yi muttered to himself, if Blazing Fire wanted his cowardice to become a habit, he would stay hidden. However, strikes had already arrived. Seconds later, the figure of the player appeared in the clearing. Liu Yi noticed the movement on the map. Blazing Fire had moved toward his ally. Coming out of invisibility, the guild president appeared with a malicious smile. He mocked Liu Yi, praising his courage. However, he reminded him that when facing the man-eating leopards, Liu Yi had revealed all his trump cards. Blazing Fire stated that in the end he had sacrificed only 2 of his men. Liu Yi didn't respond, only furrowing his brow. Strikes in turn drew his sword. Without hesitation, he and Blazing Fire advanced together to attack him. Hey everyone, did you enjoy this story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.